And now let's get started with our first keynote speaker. Yeah. Please come up, Benedetta. I have your bio. I'm going to read your bio a little bit. Okay. I know.
That's what I was waiting.
I know. The bio is everyone's favorite part. So I have the written version and I also have a few things of my own to say. So, Dr. Benedetta Brevini is Associate Professor of Political Economy of Communication at the University of Sydney and visiting professor at the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University. She's also Senior Visiting Fellow at the London School of Economics and Political Science. She's an expert in critical AI and the relationship between data capitalism, AI and the climate crisis, and environmental communication. Before joining academia, she worked as a journalist in Milan, New York, and London for CNBC and The Guardian. She has published countless books, publications. She's a teacher, she's a mentor, she's a thought leader. I would say oftentimes, or at least in my echo chamber, we hear a lot about the godfathers of AI. And I would say that Benedetta, Dr. Brevini, is one of the godmothers of sustainable AI. Her first book on the topic, Can AI Save the Planet, was for me what opened my eyes into, oh my God, can it save the planet? Where she was really pushing back on this idea of the sustainability of AI. So I consider Benedetta one of the godmothers. And I would also say Benedetta was a keynote speaker in our last conference 2 years ago, and she had this provocative idea where she was asking all of the speakers, if you had a golden wand, what would you do? If AI were this golden wand, what would you do? What are the promises? What are the things that you want to see happen? So I'm really curious, no pressure, but that stuck with me for 2 years. And so I'm really curious to hear what ideas and visions Benedetta is going to bring to the stage to the audience today. So without further ado, I welcome Benedetta Brevini to the stage as our first keynote speaker.
So, thank you, Aimee, and thank you to the wonderful team of the Institute of Science and Ethics. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here with you today and also share ideas that I've been working on for the last 2 years. And Aimee, you started this conference asking us to be bold, and I actually will try really hard to deliver on this, so I'll be bold. These are ideas that will be published in a forthcoming book, and you will see also a change from the discussions that we had. But I really hope that they can contribute to discourse around sustainable AI that will be promising for us as academics, for policymakers, and for educators around the world. So, one of my top students came to me very recently saying, Professor, I have unsubscribed from all generative AI applications. When I asked her why, she said, I realized that after 2 years of using them, I was unable to text a friend without help. I was unable to write an email on my own. I was forgetting how to write. Perhaps you have stories like this too already. We didn't 2 years ago. Our universities and research institutes are grappling, sometimes clumsily, with the implications of AI, and so are our students. So this conference is posing the vital questions as we witness this relentless rise of AI capitalism. What does sustainable AI look like? And how can we make AI more sustainable? But what I want to argue today is that if we truly believe that technology is a social relation, and that technology discourse legitimizes a particular type of society, then an equally vital question to ask is, what kind of society can be sustained with AI? What are its defining characteristics, and what are the values an AI capitalist society displays? And if we are clear about the society we're building, then we can also think about how to redraw a more sustainable horizon. I want to call the society that we are building today an artificial society. As Gramsci explained, Fordism was never really about just factories and modes of production. It was about generating new cultural logics, subjectivities, values, and social norms. It was about how people could imagine themselves. So while the AI revolution is still incomplete, discourse around AI is already shaping our values in particular direction, not the future. It's happening now, and quite often inviting us to abandon certain values as inevitable trade-offs to the efficiency and opportunities that AI holds. I want to argue that current AI discourse is already legitimizing a type of capitalism that defines, to use Mark Fisher terms, the whole horizon of society, so that we can't imagine an alternative. So how does an artificial society look like? What are its defining values? It is a society that celebrates illiteracy. A study conducted by MIT in June 2025 with about 56 people aged between 18 to 38 found that ChatGPT users showed the lowest levels of brain engagement and consistently underperform at neural, linguistic, and behavioral levels. Over the course of several months of usage, participants who relied on ChatGPT grew progressively lazier with each essay, many ultimately defaulting to simple copy and paste by the study's end. So if generative AI can summarize, why read and comprehend deeply? If generative AI can take on, so we're told, trivial tasks, why spend years practicing? Why trying to master the art of summarizing, understanding, developing a voice? The result of dependence on AI is the erosion of cognitive ability to master writing without prompts. We are becoming the prompters. Progressively, this erodes our need to think, the efforts associated with it. This is not just an educational deficit, it is the foundation of a new cultural logic. In the words of Gramsci, la psicologia popolare, i modi di sentire e di vivere, di pensare e di operare, the way we live, the way we feel, the way we think, and the way we operate. So in the artificial society, we have decided that cognitive functions no longer hold enough values to be defended. Universities are increasingly complicit in spreading these values. Their role should be not to be reduced to offering endless workshops to ensure the students become AI literate and academics too, competent in using AI. Rather, universities should reaffirm the value of knowledge itself, the value of learning to practice, the challenges but also the rewards of cultivating intellectual discipline. This mission should be to nurture what I call cognitive literate humans. So in the artificial society, we dismiss the value of human cultivation, intellectual discipline, the joy, but also the value of learning. A society that does not value literacy and critical thinking produces generations that are technically competent in operating systems, but illiterate in critical, historical, and scientific knowledge. I do not know what I think until I write it down, repeated John Didion. Which leads me to the next point. An artificial society is a society that fails to acknowledge professions that have held cultural and economic values for centuries, especially those grounded in cognitive skills and intellectual labor. Here you might see immediately the connection with what I described earlier, the values of illiteracy, and the disrespect for knowledge and expertise. We know because of decades of Marxist analysis that capital has traditionally a strong interest in automating the high cost of labor. Obviously, the acceleration of this will depend on how the digital lords of AI will let businesses access AI services at a lower cost than the labor they are preparing to eliminate. But I don't want to focus on this dynamic. Again, although we already have plenty of evidence that many small and medium businesses are not getting much in terms of augmented profits because of the elimination of the workforce in favor of AI. But this is not the point that I want to make. What I want to focus on is really how, in Weberian terms, the AI spirit is changing the way in which we imagine ourselves as humans and workers. Do we want a society that does not incentivize learning to speak 9 languages because we prefer to delegate these functions to an AI? Ask this question. Do we want a society where teachers are gradually forced to interact with AI under the pretense of avoiding AI literacy, so that instead of engaging directly with students, they are expected to consult first their AI oracles? Antonio Casilli has a useful point here, arguing that, in fact, many jobs invented in the artificial society, such as AI trainers and data laborers, are jobs done by human workers. So there are not jobs replaced by an AI, in fact, but they are replaced by jobs by other humans. Why should the work of a data laborer be considered more liberating, more validating, and more respected than that of a translator or a classroom teacher? Because these are the values validated in the artificial society. If we are happy to make cognitive faculties redundant, then we are also happy to dismiss the expertise and the human knowledge acquired through rigor and praxis. Think for a moment of how many scientists, in particular climate scientists, feel in the artificial society. And I'm not just talking about the US, and we can talk about this later. Think of the massive increase in climate misinformation fueled by generative AI interacting with social media ecosystem. There is now ample evidence showing how AI, as a language system, can legitimize certain forms of knowledge while obscuring or marginalizing others. In our artificial society, often in the name of free speech, we legitimize a devaluation of facts and science. We neglect to protect our scientists that consistently, in interviews that we ran in the last 2 years, confirm to be feeling let down by their own institutions. An artificial society rewards conformity and self-censorship. For many years, many of us, also united in this conference, have sounded the alarm about the growing consolidation of power of the digital lords and the advance of techno-capitalism and the concentration of power in the hands of a few AI developers. Again, something that we allow to happen because we choose deregulation and privatization. Today, as we know, also to popularize the account, think of the success of AI empires, the scale of AI power concentration is staggering. Wealthiest individuals in the world are now deeply invested in AI, and their fortunes are tied up to its expansion. And in 2025 alone, we have something like 46 new billionaires that invested specifically and recently in AI. And I have the Forbes list that was just released in August 2025, indicating that out of the 10th wealthiest humans in the world, men actually, come from the AI and technology sector. I'm sure you recognize a few of them. So it shouldn't come as a surprise if, when it comes to the critique of AI itself, dissenting voices are often marginalized or silenced in favor of narratives that reinforce AI inevitability and promise. In an artificial society, we celebrate disconformity. We celebrate homogenization, particularly within elites, policymakers, political leaders, and academics. So self-censorship becomes the norm. It would seem, and I quote from Tocqueville, Democracy in America, that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character. It would be more extensive and milder. It would degrade men without tormenting them. Self-censorship is more extensive and milder, isn't it? In an artificial society, self-censorship becomes the fundamental pillar of the condition of participation. And let's be clear about this. As much as this AI spirit guides our values, our imagination as humans, self-censorship applies to every articulation of the public sphere. The lack of respect for science, for facts, and for carefully elaborated opinions fosters a climate of self-censorship. And because Habermas saw the possibility of a rational consensus as the basis of participation in the public sphere, in an artificial society, it is self-censorship that holds us together. Consensus, then, is not achieved by reasoned deliberation. It is achieved by shared silences. An artificial society is a society that does not protect creativity and celebrates theft. As of September 2025, there are 48 copyright lawsuits filed against AI companies in the US. 48. We know that the data used to train AI comes all from copyrighted material written by authors, experts, you, writers. Just last week, we saw Anthropic pay a settlement of $1.5 billion in a class action with US authors. But my point here is that we are starting to get used to the idea that stealing of content, stealing of creativity is in fact fair use. Because, as the digital lords argue, when models are trained on stolen data, they are transformative. I love this word. They are transformative. So we are surrendering with stubborn defeatism to the idea that we can no longer expect originality, and we can no longer require respect for creativity. Creativity is imagination in motion. And to borrow from Raymond Williams, creativity is our practical consciousness. And I want you to think about this, practical consciousness, which can be the struggle at the roots of the mind. Just the other day, I spoke to the organizer of a youth poetry contest. They told me that they had to cancel it because it has become nearly impossible to expect genuinely original creative work from the youngest. A society that tolerates the theft of ideas and so casually forgoes of creativity cannot be expected to cultivate respect for original thought. We are losing our imagination in motion. We are forsaking, in the words of Gry Hasselbalch, our human power, aren't we? An artificial society is a society that neglects the urgency of the climate emergency. At a recent US congressional hearing, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt made a striking admission. AI will eventually consume up to 99% of global electricity, and this conference is used to this type of data. And through a wonderful investigation of the Canadian National Observer, Aimee, we found out that Google has casually scrapped all 2030 net zero pledges. Casually, they just disappeared from the website. And it took a team of wonderful journalists for us to notice. It was very quietly removed. And of course, you can watch the conversation of Eric Schmidt here, because I think you will find it particularly interesting, if I can make it work.
What we need from you, if I may say that directly, is we need energy in all forms, renewable, non-renewable, whatever. It needs to be there, and it needs to be quickly. People are planning 10 gigawatt data centers. Just to do the translation, an average nuclear power plant in the United States is 1 gigawatt. How many nuclear power plants can we make in 1 year while we're planning this 10 gigawatt data center? Gives you a sense of how big this crisis is. Many people think that the demand of energy part that our industry takes will go from 3% to 99% of total generation. One of the estimates that I think is most likely is that data centers will require an additional 29 gigawatts of power by 2027 and 67 more gigawatts by 2030. Gives you a sense of the scale that we're talking. These things are industrial at a scale I have never seen in my life.
These things are industrial at the scale he has never seen in his life. There is an energy emergency for the digital lords. And not even once he mentioned the climate emergency that we're facing. So, and what is absolutely striking about the presentation is really how he completely neglects to acknowledge that it's not an emergency, an energy emergency just for the AI lords. It is a climate emergency that should be the focus of what we're doing. And the other striking thing is really the incredible arrogance of the tone of his demands. It's like the emergency is not only for the data companies that need more energy for their needs. So the implication of the climate emergency on entire countries, on millions of people, devastated landscapes, does not get mentioned nor addressed. And where is the outrage, I wonder? So just to make sure that we are all aware of the data, and it would be lovely if this could move again. Yes. We know that since 2017, global data center electricity consumption has increased at an average of 12% per year, which is 4 times the growth rate of overall electricity consumption. And this also coupled with what we already know about the consumption, for example, of very basic AI searches, search versus the typical ordinary Google search. We also have very recent Goldman Sachs data that are actually telling us that the forecasts are projecting a surge of 165% by 2030 of total worldwide electricity. So, you know, since when we had this conversation a couple of years ago, we could see what was the trajectory, but we weren't as sure of the decision that were about to come on this type of development. And so this is why I want us to reflect on this data, because we are in presence of something really different in the artificial society. And you might want to refer to obviously the previous work I did on the eco-political economy of AI, also to remember that the extent of the environmental damages of AI, of course, is not just confined to the training and the inference expenditure and consumption of electricity of data center, but goes far behind that. So just for us to remember, all of this is happening when we know from the so-called final warning that we got from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that the urgent needs to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 is even more staggering today, because to stay within the limit, emissions must be cut by at least 43% by 2030 relative to 2019 levels, and by 60% by 2035. So what are the values that constantly leads the artificial society to neglect the emergency and favors this type of energy consumption expansion? What are the values that are defining the artificial society then? Well, in an artificial society, we just push ahead without pausing to consider the trade-offs and the consequences. Unchecked AI development driving the crisis further, while droughts, floods, water scarcity, and grid failures intensify. So once again, the clash grows sharper between the endless appetite for energy and the basic human needs underscored by the environmental justice movement. So again, major economic development decisions should place the climate emergency at the forefront. Radical decisions about energy governance are urgently needed, and this is not just a technical decision. And this is really part of the argument that I want to make. You know, we always feel and are pushed towards taking these technical decisions, but these are actually decisions on society and where we want society to move. And actually, we should be in the position to decide how much power we should give to AI lords to pursue their own interests. Remember, it's not a climate emergency, it's an energy emergency for the data lords. So, in the artificial society, defeatism becomes an accepted value. And this is precisely the type of cultural sensibility that Gramsci described, the way we are operating, the way we feel as humans. And I see this especially in younger generation. You can comprehend how easily this nihilism is connected to the values I discussed earlier, and how the convergence towards homogenized thought is happening, what Adorno described as hypnotic definition of dictations. So this defeatism is linked to the acceptance that dissent becomes futile, laughable, and therefore illegitimate. And so we converge towards a cautious, polished, and flattened language that constantly chooses neutrality over critique. So the artificial society we are building, normalizing and legitimizing through Weber's AI spirit, celebrates illiteracy, devalues knowledge and expertise, rewards conformity and self-censorship, celebrates and normalizes creativity theft, eliminates professions that we have valued for centuries, neglects the climate emergency, and rewards defeatism. I hope this bold provocation will help us consider what kind of society we have enabled. If the spirit of AI has already legitimized the type of society we're living in, then true reform must begin with the society itself. Governance should then understood broadly. So it's welfare governance that is AI governance. It's education governance that is AI governance. It's climate, energy, and media governance. They are all AI governance. By changing the lens through which we approach this transformation, we can begin to imagine a new and more hopeful and sustainable horizon for human life, and the role for AI that is credible, reasonable, and that serves humane values. As David Graeber once said, we can and should creatively produce the world and remake it as we wish. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Benedetta. So yeah, sorry to switch on you in the middle of your talk, but I need to see the questions coming from online. Thank you. That was really interesting, the artificial society. and how you conceptualize it. I'm excited to get into the discussion. So the floor is now open for questions and answers from the audience. I saw Dodzi's hand first, and then I see a hand at the back, and the microphone will come to you. And then I see Federica.
Thank you very much for the presentation, thought-provoking. When you were giving the values of artificial society, I tried to identify them. One, society of illiteracy. Back home, we have been classified as a society of illiteracy. Two, when it comes to conformity and self-censorship, back home, we have been classified as a society that is very conformative. The other one, neglect the agency of climate emergency. Back home, I dare say, we don't believe in climate emergency. The stream is always warm, so we don't know what is global warming. Looking at this, I feel there's an existence of artificial society already. So I don't know how what you are saying will negate that existence. From my background, from the majority world to, I think, from Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, these things are not new. So I don't know how we can reconcile it.
If you follow the main argument, the argument is that, yes, we are in the artificial society. I haven't designed something that will happen in the future. I think actually that very often the future gets used as an excuse to avoid reforming the status quo when there are basic inequalities that we should address, and lack of social and environmental justice, for example. So yes, we have already built the artificial society because these values are already highly ingrained in our way of thinking, unfortunately. And so the major argument is really based on the assumption that technological discourse, AI discourse, are informing much more than the relations of productions of a capitalist society, right? So what they are informing are the values, the human values, the social relations, the way we feel, we operate, we think, okay? And this is already happening. So I'm not designing a dystopia that will happen in the past. The point I'm making is that what is crucial to ask is, given that we have established these values in our society, what are the options for reform? And one of the reasons why very often we fail in addressing the way in which AI is then developed is that we hope sometimes to have one solution that will fit all. Firstly, AI is a category that cannot really be defined. And secondly, the point is we need to think about reforming society. This is why I gave the example of, like, we want a different set of values. We want to celebrate literacy. Then we introduce educational policy. We don't look at an AI policy. We look at educational policies. We want AI to be sustainable. Well, we are looking at environmental and energy policy to impact the way in which AI. So it's the other way around, the most promising solution. And another very important point is really that what happens with also established hegemonic thinking around AI discourse is that once these values are so ingrained in our way of thinking, behaving, being also as academics, we fail to see other words and other possibility. And this is why it is important to step back and to really ask these questions and actually to realize that we still can in trying to change these values, but we need to operate from a very different perspective, which is let's place society first.
My concern is the global consumption of your thoughts, which I just said that's why I said that there's pre-existing society already with some of the values that you just mentioned. And again, when you use the word artificial society, are you also proposing, is there a presupposition that there's a natural society if you want to contrast artificial to something? I'm just thinking aloud. So I don't know whether there's a presupposition also of a contrast to artificial society. I don't know.
I mean, my aim with this book is really to look at what are the major values that we are establishing in the contemporary society we're living. And we know that we arrived here through an evolution, right? But because a lot of also Marxist analysis have been focused, for example, on the way in which the forces of production are changing under different conditions of capitalism. So, from Fordism to post-Fordism, and how neoliberalism logic have changed this force of production. My aim with this is actually to pose and to say this is not just about the forces of production. This is about hegemonic thinking and the way in which the social relations are changing and the values of humans are changing. So it's a different step, right, what I'm doing. And I'm not arguing for the presence of an utopian natural society before this. I'm actually trying to establish the way in which technological discourse has already legitimized a different type of society.
Thank you. Tabea, can you move to the question at the back? And then I have Federica and Dirk and Gry.
As you were talking, the one thing that came to my mind was that throughout various generations of technology, we've basically reshaped the material space of our society. So certain skills that were at one point valuable don't need to be today valuable. Memory, you had to memorize books by heart. Who cares about that right now? You don't need it. You can access books at hand. Maybe you needed skills to navigate through the forest. Right now, only if you're into survival type of things is that still important. So what I'm trying to hint at, when you're talking about AI's attack on literacy, on creativity, or all of these things, is this sort of a transition point for the material basis that transforms our society to whatever else it will become. So right now, I see, in the past framework, yes, all this literacy type of summarization and the creativity that we were used to was important, but it doesn't mean in the future we won't have creativity. Creativity will be intermediate in a different way, to different social, structural, material means, right? So what I'm trying to basically ask is, isn't this a bit of an alarmist proposal that sort of is a bit like, oh, the past was so special, but does not imagine how this will restructure the same concepts and values on a different material basis?
Did I mention that the past was so much better?
Well, I mean, you're saying we're losing something special in a way, but you're not looking at it distinct from its material concerns. Like, you're talking about literacy as if it doesn't matter from what need it necessitates, because literacy is valuable within a context. It's not context independent. Nothing is context independent. So we don't need literacy. We need what literacy provides. And that can be reshaped through material and social dynamics as they evolved through time and structure, right?
So, what you're arguing, of course, is from a very interesting, also tech deterministic perspective that really struggles to think that the evolution of progress always has to lead us to a better place by necessity, okay? And so this is, a question and a type of provocation that I had to address, and we will address also in the afternoon and again on Thursday. So my perspective is that once we were listening in the 90s to Negroponte telling us, I see a new era of democracy being achieved to the new networks that the internet will build. I see the hierarchies coming down because of the way in which these major global networks are built. It really didn't liberate us, did it? Actually, we always forget that what has actually led is to the way in which major AI lords have built on public resources that, let's remember, were given through major resources and investment coming from defense and universities, and have been capitalized through rent that were super cheap, and we built these monopolies. So the idea of breaking down hierarchies and creating a society of where power asymmetries didn't exist anymore was proven wrong. Can we say that at this point? So it might also be that because of the way, as humans, we are working in terms of thinking and writing, summarizing and making sense of things, I actually think that as a society, we need to establish what we want also to be as humans. I mean, there is a fantastic poem by Joe Fasano that if you haven't read, I really invite you to read because I found it extraordinary. And it's a poem to a student that used ChatGPT and generative AI to write an essay. And the poem ends like this. The question to the student and says, what are you trying to be free of? The living? The miraculous task of it? Love is for the ones who love the work. I think it's a very simple answer, also to what you're arguing about creativity. Don't we want to preserve the joy of the practice? Do we want to preserve the joy of our imagination in motion? So, I'm not arguing that there are other types of creativity that we can develop, and absolutely I'm certainly someone that is very open to those. But I think that there are some pillars of value of our society that wants to recognize human values that maybe we want to consider before giving them up, especially when we know as humans that we feel a little bit powerless in shaping this type of AI development. Do we want a world where the major values are the ones of Mark Zuckerberg? Do we? I don't know. I'm wondering, because actually, if you have a conversation with Mark, it might be that his way of thinking in terms of creativity is very different from mine. So I want us to pause and to say, we are losing the capacity to summarize. We are losing the capacity to very quickly understand a theme, a topic, and being able to explain things. Let's remember that knowledge is something that we get after we give meaning to information. So as a human, I want to be able to give meaning to what you're saying to me. And I see in my students in 2 years of ChatGPT that they're struggling with this. And so I am really concerned about this, and I want us to think, what is the best AI policy to intervene to make AI sustainable? And I'm using a definition of sustainability that is broader than environmental sustainability to touch upon the social and economic well-being as well. And so in this case, in my view, for example, and I'm proposing this, and it's something that you can bring to the European Commission, why is it that as humans, we have to wait until we are 16 or 18 years old before we drive a car? Why is society arguing that we need to wait before we drive a car? And something similar should happen with the sort of educational governance that we could think of developing. It's not an AI policy, it's an educational intervention. So why not having the development, why not thinking in terms of an educational cognitive literacy test before we can use generative AI, for example? So this is a way, to mold, this is a way to shape our thinking and say, well, it can be useful for you to become a prompter. But once you at least has acquired the basic skills that are literacy skills. And because I can see that if you are not learning those skills, you're never going to develop them. And so this is a possible intervention. And again, the idea of looking at these problems from the perspective of the society we're building is helpful in this sense, because it also shows the kind of interdisciplinary challenges we have, but also offers a more pragmatic way to address the issues, I think. So.
Interesting.
Long answer.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Federica, microphone. We need a microphone up here. I have Federica, then Dirk, then Gry. José, did I see your hand up too? Okay. Okay, thank you. We have 10 minutes for 4 questions, so we keep the questions and answers short. Sorry.
All right. Yes. I'll try. No, yes, thank you so much. I really enjoy, you talk about the spirit of AI. I was thinking about that also. I don't know if you're using like Charles Taylor's social imaginaries, but it seems to me like also what you're trying to do, like what is the social imaginary behind, these practices and the vision behind that. And I was thinking like going back to some of the things that, some of the other questions are, a couple of things. One is this, how in a way this, you know, how is this kind of AI imaginary different from kind of good old capitalist imaginary? Is it just like pushing it a little bit more, or is it that we are really getting upset as academic because it's really infringing on what we do? You know, you talk about literacy, and I would say in a way creativity goes beyond literacy, and I wonder to what extent other forms of creativity are really affected by it, or you know, we're talking about kind of summarizing and writing and reading, and that's what, you know, just one way to think about creativity. But in a way, it's interesting because it goes beyond, as you say, like the initial promises and vision on what AI is doing, so in that way, I think that's different, because it seemed like AI and the internet were going beyond the kind of capitalist imaginary, but as you more show, it's actually very much the same. One question I had was in terms of the self-censorship and conformity. To me, they seem like quite different, where conformity is accepting inevitability and it's just very passive, while self-censorship, there is some more kind of active and proactive aspect to it. And so I was just thinking about that. I was just wondering like how I've been thinking about them and how different they are. And
this is very, very useful, Federica, actually, because I've been pondering really for the last 2 years, what is special about self-censorship, and that makes it very different. So different also from to conform, right? So to the homogenizing thinking coming from ideas of the Frankfurt School, for example, you know. And I actually think that self-censorship for me is really becoming a way to be accepted in a society more, and also a way to make sense. So it is very much connected to the politics of identity, who you are, and the way in which you are inflicting yourself with this pain of having to conform. So it is actually something that is deeper than conformity. And I think actually not only academics, but intellectuals have been feeling like this. And certainly for me, living in New York and having to face the everyday of the Trump administration is something that has been really made me think in terms of this pain. And also in terms of you feel that in order to participate, you have to conform, but then it is something that really challenges your own identity. Right? So I don't know if I made sense of this, but I think it's there is a difference there. And for me, it's really relevant. And of course, it's also much linked to the AI and technological discourse and how difficult it is to make these critiques accepted, you know? So thank you.
Thank you. And now over to Dirk. Benna, do you want some water?
Yes, thank you so much. Highly appreciated your talk and your thesis. I would like to dig a bit deeper concerning the reasons why we have now this type of society and this artificial society, and what type of responsibility we have in research and researchers, as researchers. When I talk with scientists, in particular outside the humanities, they often define themselves, oh, it's about data, data-driven, data analysis, data interpretation, etc., etc. Even the mayor said, oh, we need more data to guide our activities. And my impression is that this causes a new ontological level between the reality, the users, and the interpreters. So a digital, data-driven level, which becomes more and more artificial, but more and more powerful. Yeah? So don't we need to rethink about our scientific practice as a social practice, much more related to society, to nature, which is not only about data. I don't want to argue against data, but to concentrate how data are being related between society, thinking, values, etc.
I think this is a brilliant question, and a question I've been really trying to address for a bit of time, because so firstly, you have the issue of this data-driven science and knowledge and scientists, and which is, in my view, a form of data solutionism. So technical solutionism. Everything gets translated into technicalities. So this, of course, if we look at the historical progression of this, is linked to the way in which also neoliberal economics has been forcing and has been really subsumed into economic and liberal projects, right, from the US to Europe, okay? So the idea that everything can be fixed, right, through technicalities. And so, and this is also fascinating because it also entails this incredible faith in progress, right? Which comes from philosophical tradition that in Germany you are very aware of, because, you know, like it's really from Hegel, this idea of the cycles and the progress, you know, it was never to go back. It was always a progression, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. At the same time, you see that years of also critical sociology and critical political economy critique has showed that we have a problem with technicalities, because if we just let technical solution prevail, we take the politics away of it, and we take the social relations and the inequalities and the injustice that are not addressed by this technical solution. So I completely agree with you. We need to reappropriate this also qualitative assessment as humans. And this is why I'm proposing to really focus on values. And also I'm proposing this to a lot of ethicists that are very used to think in terms of values, but I come from sociology, because critical political economy is sociology. And I find that from a sociological perspective, we often tend to get lost in this data and technicalities when we don't ponder enough to, okay, do I want to protect a data labeler? Is it true that a data labeler has a more liberating job? Is it true that as a more fulfilling job? Because this is part of the technical mythologies that are sold to us. You know, to go back to Federica's question as well, one of the major and interesting mythologies of AI that is something even, I think, pushed farther from the mythologies of the superhighways, the mythologies of the internet, the mythologies that were, you know, displayed in the 90s, is this idea that we are freeing you from burdensome task. We are liberating you from burdensome task. And I think actually this really goes back to technological fixes. So technological fixes are a solution because neoliberalism, you know, tells us that if we don't intervene in the market, then the market will provide. And so through tech fixes, we can, you know, address the crisis of capitalism easily. But it's very political. It's a political project. So thank you.
Next question is Gry in the blue. Can you raise your hand so she can see? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Brevini, for this. It was an amazing talk, a deconstruction of values in this artificial society. And what really struck me, though, was the disconnect that there is with the disconnect between the values that we're practicing in this society and the values that we actually have institutionalized and that are in our laws. So I myself, as you know, have been working in this environment in the governance part, very happy about seeing the development from, you know, you have to think that in 2013, the UN put in a resolution that the same rights we have offline, we also applies online. That's pretty amazing considering how many years before that we had the internet and the online environment, and now we're getting into the same kind of conversations. So my question to you is, there's this huge disconnect between the values that are being practiced and the values that we have actually agreed to in democratic processes, in our laws, in the institutionalized process. So how, and it's widening, and every time we agree in maybe in institutional practices and in governance, we agree these are the values we have. Human dignity, human agency is the first principle in the AI Act, for example, no? Every time we agree on those, it continues the development with these illegal practices, which I would actually call them. So how do we combine this? How do we go beyond this? You were talking a little bit about governance.
Yes. So I think I'll start with the power political economic answer. So we know very well that the social economic ideological power are impacting policymaking, right? So we know the way in which the values of the AI or the digital lords are shaping a lot of this conversation in the policymaking sphere, unfortunately. And we also know how sometimes as academics we feel a bit powerless because we don't get funded if we don't associate with AI lords. We don't get funded if we don't associate with the industry sometimes. And so for me, a very useful way is to keep having this conversation to change the dominant discourse. So if we try really to address and to change the dominant discourse, the values will also change. And so the discussion will change the focus. But the point that I want, for me, it is fascinating always to be in Europe because I really, after years spent in the Asia Pacific and now recently more in the US, I really see that Europe is the only hope to try to have this conversation about values and trying to embed these values in institutions. And many of the efforts that have been done with antitrust and, better than me, also the intervention of the European Commission have been trying, to address some of these issues, but I completely agree with you. I think actually Europe, for example, should be focused on the charters. So the values enshrined in the charters of fundamental rights add a lot of these values enshrined, but we often forget them because, the only values that are constantly, dominant are the ones of just fair competition instead of focusing on, for example, institutions that I always mention, which are our famous Amsterdam Protocol celebrated public service institutions, for example. So we need to go back to those institutions that can and should foster some leadership here. I'm always telling my students, if this so-called revolution was happening in the 40s and 50s, we would have had all major ZDF in Germany, ADF and BBC in the UK, DR, and all the major public institutions being involved in this. But they are completely absent because they've been defunded, because they've been deregulated. And so we are in this situation. I still think, actually, following the human power and the values that you described in your book, there is a possibility here, but our job also as academics and policymakers impacting is really to keep having this conversation that without being afraid, really, without being inflicting on ourselves the pain of self-censorship, which I understand very often, because even before giving this talk, I was wondering, how are they going to take this if the industry is present? What are they going to make of this? So I have, I'm doing an ethnography of myself as well as an intellectual. But I actually think that we have this opportunity now because the climate crisis is actually, unfortunately, progressing in a way that is really something much stronger than what we predicted and what the scientists predicted. And yesterday, there was a fantastic that I really was, they published an economic report in Australia, very interesting, about the economic impact of the climate crisis on the country. And it's an excellent, really interesting read for everybody because, again, when I talk about trade-offs, climate emergency should be at the forefront, not the development of data centers that in any case, are so unsustainable because we don't have water, we don't have enough resources. So again, why don't we place these values at center stage? The climate crisis will force us to do something in any case, but also to look at the incredible data about the economic impact of the climate crisis is very useful. And I think actually it's a useful read for all policymakers in Europe. So.
Thank you. Okay, we have two more questions. Can we combine them? So can we hear the two questions and then you have a chance to respond to both of them together, and then we go to our break. So in the baseball cap, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. And then Tabea, bring it to José. Thank you. Sorry,
okay, thank you. Thanks a lot for your thought-provoking talk. I was actually wondering if we should rather speak of the values of artificial societies, so to use the plural, because we still have some context specificity that then gets lost, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have a conversation also later. Definitely. At the same time, I'm also talking about some values that are quite universal here, because I actually want us to really ponder. And of course, then at the local level, at the national level, we have differences. But in terms of, thinking in terms of what we're doing to creativity, what we're doing to literacy, how we are treating the climate crisis, I think that there is a lot. So I've been really focusing on a common ground, because I think actually the common ground is useful as a starting point that goes in different sectors, as I highlighted, so the governance of education, the governance of energy. I'll stop here because I know that time is precious.
Well, hello, thank you very much for your talk, Professor Brevini. So I would like just to go back to your phrase when you said that Europe would be the only place where these values could be discussed. And I'm wondering if it isn't also a trap that we're falling into when we think about Eurocentrism as a way of thinking of that, since that's where capitalism came from, that's where colonialism and then coloniality of knowledge, power, and etc. are driving from. And I'm asking this because in Brazil, where I come from, the ones who are now suffering the most with the impact of this new drive towards infrastructure are indigenous communities, which at least in my society are the ones who definitely are not following, at least a big part of them are not following this kind of values as knowledge frameworks.
Oh, well,
thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you for the great question. There is a lot in terms of the thinking around care and communities in this talk, because I've been exposed and I've been using a lot of also indigenous thinking coming from Maori or coming from Aboriginal Australia. So ideas of care, community, are absolutely crucial for this. But what is really important is that what I described also is the way in which the forces of production are impinging the values, but the forces of production that are also impacting the global south are the same, so let's remember this. And it's even more ruthless in the global south, because, I've been speaking to a lot of colleagues in Brazil, in Mexico. I have a big project with Mexico and Brazil at the moment, and they're all trying to mobilize indigenous communities for lack of water, against data centers development, for example. But, you really see that these forces that have been called data colonialist forces, or they've been called imperialist forces, are even more ruthless in their impact. So the idea that there is a total disregard for the climate emergencies is even more present in the global south. So in this way, these are universal values that can be useful for policies that extend to the European-centric environment. So,
thank you. Sorry. Thanks so much, Benedetta, Professor Brevini. Thank you. Thanks for your keynote. Thanks for answering the question. It's like a marathon. To me, I find it interesting. Imagine, 5 to 10 years for the students who are using GPT for their essays and for their whatever. They might be able to give a talk, but they could not do a half an hour Q&A like that. So, this is watching, what
absolutely.
Education does.
Being able to summarize and quickly, I think it's a useful skill.
Yeah, it's like acrobatics for the brain. Anyway, thank you again so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we have a short break right now. I went a little bit overtime because Benedetta started a little bit late. So in the foyer, there's coffee, tea, and some snacks. We come back into this room at 11:30 for the next panel. Listen for the bell. I'll be ringing that bell when it's time to come back into this room. Thank you. See you soon.